Someone does not reply to a text for 6 hours, not because they are evil, not because they are manipulating anyone. Maybe they were exhausted, maybe they were in a meeting, maybe they saw the message, thought they would answer later, and then life swallowed the rest of the day. But online, that person might instantly become toxic. If they explain themselves, they are gaslighting. If they need space, they are emotionally unavailable. If they make the same mistake twice, someone calls them a narcissist. And here is the uncomfortable truth. The people who refuse to talk this way may not be emotionally unaware. They may be the most psychologically stable people in the room, because real emotional maturity does not always sound like therapy language. Sometimes it sounds painfully simple. You hurt me. That was not okay. I need some time. I do not trust this anymore. I am leaving. No diagnosis. No courtroom speech. No dramatic label placed on someone's entire identity. Just honesty. And in a culture where everyone is learning how to sound healed, honesty has become strangely rare. There was a time when psychological language felt liberating. Words like trauma, boundaries, gaslighting, attachment, emotional abuse, and narcissism gave people a way to name pain they had carried for years without language. For many people, these words were not trends. They were lifelines. Someone who had been manipulated finally understood why they always felt confused. Someone who had been emotionally neglected finally realized they were not too sensitive. Someone who had spent years blaming themselves finally had a framework that made sense. That matters. The problem is not therapy. The problem is not psychology. The problem is what happens when deep, careful words escape their original context and become social weapons. Because online, psychological language does not always make people more honest. Sometimes, it just makes them harder to question. A person no longer says they felt dismissed when you interrupted them. They say you are invalidating their lived experience. A person no longer says they do not like how you spoke to them. They say your tone is abusive. A person no longer says this relationship feels bad for them. They say you are toxic. And maybe sometimes those words are accurate, but sometimes they are not. Sometimes they are used because they sound powerful. Sometimes they are used because they make the speaker feel morally untouchable. Sometimes they are used because plain language would require vulnerability, and vulnerability is much harder than vocabulary. It is easier to say you are a narcissist than to say I wanted you to care about me, and I am embarrassed by how much it hurt when you did not. It is easier to say you gaslit me than to say I am scared that my memory might not be perfect, but I still know something felt wrong. It is easier to say you violated my boundaries than to say I did not clearly express what I needed, and now I am angry that you did not guess it. That is where emotionally stable people begin to stand out, not because they never use psychological words, but because they are careful with them. They understand that a label can explain behavior, but it can also erase complexity, and emotionally mature people can tolerate complexity. They can say that person hurt me without needing to prove that person is evil. They can say this relationship damaged me without turning the other person into a monster. They can admit they were mistreated while still understanding that not every painful moment is abuse, not every selfish person is a narcissist, and not every disagreement is gaslighting. That kind of restraint is rare now, because social media rewards certainty. It rewards the clean, sharp sentence. Cut them off. They are toxic. That is gaslighting. You deserve better. Never explain yourself. Protect your peace. These phrases feel good because they remove ambiguity. They turn messy human relationships into simple moral maps. There is the healed person. There is the toxic person. There is the villain. There is the victim. There is the boundary. There is the betrayal. And the viewer gets to decide which role they are in within 5 seconds. That is emotionally satisfying, but it is not always emotionally honest. Real life is messier. Sometimes people hurt you because they are cruel. Sometimes they hurt you because they are immature. Sometimes they hurt you because they are overwhelmed. Sometimes they hurt you because they were never taught how to love well. Sometimes they hurt you because you let something continue too long without saying the truth. And sometimes, the person you're calling toxic is simply a person who disappointed you. That does not mean you have to keep them in your life. It does not mean you have to excuse them. It does not mean your pain is fake. It means you're strong enough to tell the truth without exaggerating it. That is a quiet form of psychological strength. The ability to describe what happened without inflating it. The ability to protect yourself without performing your pain. The ability to say this was wrong without needing the internet to diagnose the person who did it. People who avoid casual therapy speak often understand something important. The more serious a word is, the more carefully it should be used. Gaslighting is not just someone disagreeing with you. Narcissist is not just someone who is selfish. Trauma is not just every uncomfortable memory. Toxic is not just every person you no longer like. When these words get used too casually, they lose their precision. And when words lose precision, people lose trust. That is why many grounded people start stepping away from the language altogether. Not because they are against mental health, but because they are tired. Tired of every friendship conflict becoming a diagnostic debate. Tired of every breakup becoming a public trial. Tired of every flawed person being reduced to a term from a podcast clip. tired of watching people use the language of healing to avoid the practice of healing. Because healing is not just knowing the right terms. Healing is noticing when you are defensive. Healing is apologizing without adding a paragraph of self-protection. Healing is saying I was wrong without turning your childhood into an excuse. Healing is hearing someone's pain without immediately questioning their tone. Healing is being able to sit in an uncomfortable conversation without reaching for a label that makes you the winner. And that may be the biggest difference. Therapy speak can help people understand themselves, but online it often helps people win. Win the breakup, win the argument, win the comment section, win the moral position. And once psychological language becomes a way to win, it stops being a tool for truth. It becomes armor. A person can hide behind boundaries when they are actually avoiding accountability. They can hide behind self-care when they are actually being selfish. They can hide behind trauma when they are actually refusing to change. They can hide behind protecting their peace when they are actually abandoning a hard conversation they helped create. This is why some of the most emotionally stable people sound almost ordinary. They do not always have the flashiest language. They do not turn every feeling into a brand. They do not need every sentence to prove how healed they are. They might simply say this: I do not think this is good for me. I need to step back. I am not okay with how that happened. I care about you, but I cannot keep doing this. I am sorry. I should have handled that differently. Plain sentences. But notice something. Plain sentences are harder to hide behind. If you say you are a toxic narcissist, the attention goes to the other person's character. If you say I felt small when you spoke to me that way, the attention goes to your actual wound. That is more exposed. That is more honest. That is also more frightening, because now you're not standing above the conversation as the psychologically enlightened person. You are inside the conversation as a human being, and that is where real maturity begins, not in sounding untouchable, but in being reachable without collapsing. There is a strange social reward now for sounding like you have done the work. People can learn a few phrases and suddenly appear emotionally advanced. They know how to say attachment wound. They know how to say nervous system. They know how to say trauma response. They know how to say holding space. But language can create an illusion. A person can talk about boundaries and still punish people with silence. A person can talk about empathy and still never ask how they affected someone else. A person can talk about emotional labor and still make everyone around them manage their moods. A person can talk about healing and still use every conversation as proof that they are the only one who has evolved. This is the part nobody wants to say out loud. The internet did not teach people psychology. It taught people how to sound psychologically untouchable. And once someone sounds untouchable, every criticism becomes harm. Every disagreement becomes invalidation. Every request becomes pressure. Every apology becomes manipulation. Every uncomfortable truth becomes unsafe. But emotionally strong people do not need to be untouchable. They can be questioned. They can be corrected. They can pause and think. They can hear "that hurt me" without immediately replying that your reaction is a trauma response. They can hear "I need you to take responsibility" without saying you are projecting. They can hear you were wrong without turning the entire conversation into an analysis of the other person's tone. That is stability, not perfect calm, not endless patience, not being above pain. Stability is the ability to stay honest when your ego wants protection. And sometimes therapy language gives the ego very elegant protection. It can make avoidance sound wise. It can make cruelty sound boundaried. It can make emotional shutdown sound regulated. It can make selfishness sound like self-respect. This is why people who refuse to overuse these words can feel refreshing. They bring the conversation back down to earth. They do not ask whether this person is a narcissist. They ask what the person did. They do not ask whether this is toxic. They ask whether this pattern is healthy for them. They do not ask whether they were gaslit. They ask whether their reality was repeatedly denied, or whether two people simply remembered the situation differently. That distinction matters, because one path leads to clarity, the other leads to certainty without reflection, and certainty can be addictive, especially when you are hurt. When someone hurts you, a label can feel like relief. It gives shape to the chaos. It gives you a villain. It gives you a story where your pain makes perfect sense. And sometimes that story is true. Some people are abusive. Some people are manipulative. Some people do gaslight. Some people are dangerous to stay close to. But the strongest people do not use the most extreme word available just because it gives them emotional leverage. They use the most accurate word. That is the difference. Accuracy over drama, clarity over performance, truth over victory. Because when you call everyone toxic, the word stops meaning toxic. When every ex is a narcissist, the word stops helping people identify real narcissistic patterns. When every uncomfortable conversation is gaslighting, people who are actually being psychologically manipulated become harder to hear. Careless language does not just damage conversations, it damages the people who need those words most. So the answer is not to throw therapy language away. The answer is to return it to its proper place. Use it when it brings light. Use it when it helps you understand a pattern. Use it when it helps you stop blaming yourself for something that was never your fault. Use it when it helps you seek help, set a real boundary, leave a harmful situation, or name something that has been hidden. But do not use it as a shortcut around humility. Do not use it to make every person who disappoints you into a diagnosis. Do not use it to avoid saying the simpler, harder sentence. I am hurt. I am angry. I miss you. I was wrong. I need to leave. I do not know how to fix this. These sentences do not sound as impressive. They will not always go viral. They may not make you look enlightened, but they are often closer to the truth, and emotionally mature people care more about truth than image. That is why they may avoid therapy speak in everyday conflict, not because they are less aware, because they are aware enough to know that language has power. They know words can clarify, but they can also condemn. They know a label can protect you, but it can also prevent you from seeing your own part. They know that sometimes the most healed thing you can do is not explain someone with a term. It is to face what happened plainly, to say this hurt, to say this cannot continue, to say I am responsible for my side, to say I can leave without turning you into a monster. That last one is difficult because anger wants a villain, pain wants a courtroom, the ego wants a diagnosis that makes leaving feel righteous, but peace does not always require a villain. Sometimes, peace only requires a decision. You can walk away from someone without branding them forever. You can protect yourself without rewriting the entire relationship as abuse. You can admit someone failed you without pretending they were never human. That is not weakness. That is emotional strength. The strongest people are not the ones who reject therapy language completely. They are the ones who do not need to use it carelessly. They know the difference between using psychology to understand someone and using psychology to win against them. Because a word is only healing when it makes you more honest. If it only makes you sound superior, it is no longer healing. It is just another way to hide. So maybe the most psychologically stable person in the room is not the one who knows the most terms. Maybe it is the one who can sit across from another human being and say the truth without turning it into a performance. No dramatic label, no online courtroom, no borrowed vocabulary to make pain sound more legitimate. Just the quiet courage to say what is real. And if you have ever felt exhausted by everyone diagnosing everyone online, comment one word, plain, because sometimes plain language is not a lack of depth. Sometimes it is the deepest thing a person can offer.